Hello, everyone. I have fulfilled all of my obligations as far as the clown realm is concerned today, including removing an insane amount of ticks from poor little Betsy here. I thought that I was doing her a favor by letting her out of the car and letting her explore. I don't put any chemicals on my dog, and I wasn't really prepared with any kind of natural repellents. But, sometimes we do things for others trying to help them and it actually hurts them. And you know the saying, no good deed goes unpunished. So once I figure out how to silence my messages here on the laptop, we're going to dive into the Elmwood Cemetery. Let's see what kind of information we can find. Alright, we're going to start off here on the goggles. Elmwood Cemetery was established in Kansas City in 1872, making it the city's second oldest cemetery. And of course, as you well know, the first being the historic Union Cemetery, which we also looked at. And the first of its kind in the rural garden style, a design later employed by architect George Kessler for his famous parks and boulevards. And again, we see this name, George Kessler. He pops up quite a bit. Key historical aspects: founding and design. Founded on a portion of Judge Lucius Carey's estate, Elmwood Cemetery was designed in the rural garden style with winding paths and mature trees. A concept pioneered by George Kessler, known for Kansas City's parks and boulevards. So they employed these mature trees apparently into their design. So initially the Elmwood Cemetery was privately owned, but it was purchased in 1896 by the Elmwood Cemetery Society, a group of prominent Kansas City businessmen who transformed it into a non-profit organization. You know, these non-profits always seem to pop up, and apparently there's a Wikipedia on this as well, I just noticed. Or should I say Wackopedia? Let's check it out. Elmwood Cemetery is a 43-acre historic rural cemetery located in what became the urban area of 4900 Truman Road at the corner of Van Brunt Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri, with an estimated 3,500 to 3,800 plots. The cemetery is owned, operated, and maintained by a nonprofit organization, Elmwood Cemetery Society. And as you well know, I'm not going to read this entire thing, just going to point out a few key interesting points, such as since the 1830s, a new trend crossed the east coast of the United States of replacing the Old English trend of having cemeteries at churches and town squares in favor of rural cemeteries to enhance sanitation and expandability for vaults, mausoleums, monuments, and naturalistic landscape architecture. In 1847, the town of Kansas, which became Kansas City in the 1850s, and I've lived here my entire life and I've never heard of the town of Kansas, but I digress, platted its first public cemetery near Locust Street and Independence Avenue. The cholera pandemic of 1849 had killed half the settlers of the towns of Kansas and Westport and filled their local cemeteries. This prompted the 1857 founding of Union Cemetery, as it shared Union in a rural site 2 miles between the towns. Sorry, guys, I have a very difficult time pronouncing the word rural. But, anyways. Alright, guys, slight distraction here. I had to check into this. And, it's possible that I am ignorant to the fact, but um, I was under the impression, or the date that I know that Kansas City was founded, of course, founded, was 1833, but this says Kansas City was founded in the 1830s as a port on the Missouri and Kansas rivers. On June 1st, 1850, the town of Kansas was incorporated. So, sounding like Kansas City was already a thing, and then this town of Kansas was then incorporated. But back to the cemetery. And of course, it was founded because, they can't tell you that they baked it from scratch. So by June 1872, an 11-member management team had been formed for Elmwood Cemetery with Superintendent Edward Fleischer, whatever, well-known founder of the Mechanics Institute and the Exposition. And let's see, yada yada, some blah 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 from the Kansas City Times. Elmwood's original features include its namesake elm and other very old native trees, several small spring-fed lakes, and a ravine. I don't recall any spring-fed lakes, but early monuments include artistic representations of angels, lilies, and cypress trees with upstretched branches. I might have to look at the so-called satellite image again and see if there's a body of water on this thing that I missed somehow. Let's see. George Kessler was employed in 1893 to make improvements. Maybe he's the guy that, went in there and put in all of these stairways to nowhere. And that's pretty much about all we're getting out of this. I got one more thing I wanted to show you guys that I thought was a little bit humorous, and we'll wrap this thing up. And here we find ourselves on the National Propaganda Radio website, and this is the Kansas City one. Cemeteries used to serve as parks. Can Kansas City's historic Elmwood Cemetery revive the tradition? Members of the Elmwood Cemetery Society hope the 150-year-old graveyard can once again be a place for family picnics and walks. And I thought that this was kind of silly because I've always joked about, yeah, it looks like a great place for a picnic or something of the sort. And apparently, this is a thing, I guess. And by the way, I am definitely not opposed to having a picnic in a cemetery. But, so I'm scrolling down here, and this is basically telling me the same stuff that I just read on the Wikipedias. As far as, the great new invention of these cemeteries, because they could no longer, or the cemeteries that were in front of churches, cathedrals, etc., were so full. But I don't know of any churches around here or cathedrals that have a cemetery anywhere near them. But I thought that was interesting. I mean, there might be, a small chapel or something like what we saw with this one. I mean, trying to think. Most of the other ones have these massive marble mausoleums, so I don't know if that is what they are including, but anyways. Oh, here's Mr. George Kessler, landscape architect. Credited with improvements to the Elmwood Cemetery. So this is interesting. Here's an old map of the cemetery. I'd zoom you in here if that was an option. But the 1872 map depicts several small ponds or small lakes that are not visible today. So this is a very interesting revelation here. We've got another cemetery that at one point in time or another had flowing water through it. So as I was just thinking to myself about this map and the lakes from the, let's see, when was that? 1872. Mr. George Kessler here was employed in 1893, and I was thinking, wow, this is interesting. It would appear as though Mr. Kessler here is the reason these lakes no longer exist. So I scrolled back up here, and sure enough, Mr. Kessler, hired by the Park Board in 1893, he left his mark on Elmwood during the same era he was designing Kansas City's parks and boulevard plan, as well as preparing Forest Park in St. Louis for the 1904 World's Fair. Several small lakes depicted in an 1872 Elmwood map do not exist today. It's possible that Kessler had them removed, said Paul Benson, Society Treasurer and for 26 years a conservator of objects at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. And I'm going to look into this George Kessler in a separate exploration here, see what else he's involved in, what other kind of crimes. So, wow, I'm really glad that I stumbled upon this website. Obviously, I noted that I did not recall seeing anything of the sort, but let's see. And that's probably the only real nugget we're going to get from this, but I'm going to try to get a screenshot of this map. Maybe try to use it as a thumbnail. But anyways, I appreciate everybody's time, and I will see you on the next one.